Good evening. The Conservatives and Labour have been outlining their main pitch to voters. The Prime Minister, in his first major speech of the campaign, said a Conservative government would unite the country and level up the prospects for people with massive investment in health, better infrastructure, more police and a green revolution. But he said the key issue to solve was Brexit. Meanwhile, Labour vowed to outspend the Tories on the NHS in England, promising an additional £6 billion a year by 2024. Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland would get the same percentage increase. But it's not been an easy day on the campaign trail, as our political editor Laura Kuenssberg reports.
Voters tried to take charge today.
You took your time, Boris, haven't you?
Yeah, where you been? Prime Minister in Yorkshire, given a talking to by people whose lives have been turned upside down by floods.
Is there anything in particular that you'd like us to do to...
No, thank you.
No.
Too late, his offer of help, they said.
A little bit too late, though. Yeah, it's a little bit too late.
While
the man that's going to be Prime Minister...
the Labour leader was confronted on the campaign trail in Glasgow.
He's running away.
And even the Lib Dems battle bus was blocked in.
We can now observe a minute's silence for the victims of austerity and Joe Swinson.
In a well-heeled part of North London, protests at decisions they took in coalition with the Tories years ago. This is the smoother side of the campaign the Conservatives want you to see. Promising a greener government and again, Boris Johnson's vow to take us out of the EU without delay.
It's done, it's complete, it's ready to go. It's the Blue Peter deal. Here's one I made earlier. All we need is a working majority. All we need is a working majority in Parliament to make Parliament work. Just 9 more seats.
None of his answers are good enough, though, for one of his former colleagues who'll stand as an independent and thinks you should think about voting Lib Dem.
Traditional Conservative voters like me should lend their support to the Liberal Democrats, but I think I'm best placed to run as an independent.
Today we've seen voters in Yorkshire be very unimpressed by your handling of the floods, and several of your former colleagues who were even Conservative ministers suggesting that people should think seriously about voting Lib Dem. Do you think you're in control of this campaign?
I made clear throughout my time there, obviously the government stands ready to support in any way that we can, and I hope that people understand the messages of reassurance that we've been giving. Your second question was about the election, and all I would say there, Laura, is, look, of course we need to get Brexit done, and I make no apology for mentioning it, because it has been paralysing politics for 3.5 years. And I'm afraid to say that the only way to get Brexit done at this election is to vote for the Conservatives and to hope that we can get a working majority.
The trail looks the same, but this is the strangest, least predictable and most important election in a long time.
All of the parties will try to stick to their favourite subjects, but as they clock up the miles and crisscross the country, every leader is likely to be pushed well beyond their comfort zone.
Labour wanted to concentrate on the extra big cheque they'd write for the NHS.
With a Labour government, there will be 26 billion extra in real terms for our NHS. Change is coming for patients and NHS staff. Vote Labour for our NHS. Thank you very much.
But there was confusion too. The John on the left said this morning that NHS staff would not be part of their promise of a 4-day week. But the John on the right?
At the Labour conference, Mr McDonnell, you suggested a hugely ambitious policy to put everybody on a 4-day working week. This morning, John said it was nonsense to suggest that could include the NHS. Which is it?
We work to live, we don't live to work. And that will apply to everybody.
It is early in this campaign. The party's official manifestos won't emerge for another week, but all sides have been forced already to go off the script. Laura Kuenssberg, BBC News, Coventry.
So, under Labour, a big increase in spending on the NHS in England, £6 billion a year on top of the extra £20 billion already promised by Theresa May. What difference could the extra money make for patients and for NHS staff? Our health editor Hugh Pym has been looking at the figures.
Once again, the NHS is front and centre in the run-up to polling day, with the parties vying to outspend each other. The Conservative government's already promised an extra £20 billion a year after inflation by 2023 in England. Labour have said they'll add another £6 billion to that, bringing the annual increase to £26 billion, and spend some of that on cutting waiting times for patients.
Are you ready? That's it. Here.
Frances, who has arthritis, is finding life a lot easier after a hip replacement. But she had to wait more than 6 months to get it done, 2 months longer than the official NHS target. She says the delay affected her in many ways.
Waiting that extra time was hard. I mean, I was deteriorating almost week by week. I could do less and less and less. So not only had I problems with my left hip, but basically my right hip and right knee were taking an awful lot of the strain then. And they were playing up big time as well. So I was in a really bad physical shape.
Whether it's a hip operation or managing a long-term health condition, the big challenge for the NHS is keeping up with increasing demands for patient care. And finding the money for that is never easy. Government spending this year on the health service in England is £139 billion. That sounds like a lot, and there has been an upward trend for total spending over the last decade. But spending per person actually fell for a while once you've adjusted for the needs of a growing and ageing population. That's the bottom line. It's only started picking up in the last couple of years. And as a percentage of GDP, that's the UK's national income, you can see here that UK health spending has actually fallen over recent years. Labour plans higher spending than under the Conservatives, though slower increases than under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. Funding is one thing, but workforce planning with more done to retain staff is what many in the NHS say is the top priority. Laura, who's a matron on a children's ward, told us the pressure was relentless.
It's exceptionally challenging at the moment. We struggle day in, day out looking after our patients. We do our absolute best for our patients at all times, but there just aren't enough of us to keep things kind of going at this level.
The politicians will have to persuade us they really are serious about supporting the people at the heart of the NHS. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Let's take a look at some of today's other election news now. And the Liberal Democrats are promising a £500 million per year increase in funding for youth services in England to help tackle what their leader Jo Swinson called an epidemic of knife crime. Unveiling the plan at a boxing gym, she said the hope is to stop young people falling into violence by coordinating help from teachers, health professionals and social services. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland would also receive extra money. Nigel Farage, who also chose a boxing theme for his campaign speech, has again refused to stand down Brexit Party candidates in Labour marginal seats. He's been under pressure to withdraw from some constituencies where Conservatives fear he could split the Leave vote. On Monday, he withdrew Brexit Party candidates from all of the seats won by the Tories at the last election. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has faced questions over his position on allowing a second referendum on Scottish independence. Today, at the start of a 2-day tour of Scotland, he said he wouldn't allow one in the first term of a Labour government, but later rode back, saying it wouldn't be a priority in the early years. Jeremy Corbyn began his visit in Glasgow as the party fights for seats in Scotland, which a decade ago was a Labour heartland. In 2010, Labour won 41 of the 59 seats. But in 2015, the year after the first independence referendum, the SNP swept the board, leaving Labour with just 1 seat north of the border. 2017 saw the party make a slight comeback, returning 7 Scottish Labour MPs. But Jeremy Corbyn's chances of becoming Prime Minister depend on winning back more. Here's our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith.
A tartan scarf and the gift of some brand new gloves may well be required for winter campaigning in Scotland, where Labour's facing a tough election.
The choice is quite simple: a Tory government or a Labour government.
He didn't mention the SNP or the demand for another independence referendum, but that's the big question in Scotland.
No referendum in the first term for Labour government, because I think we need to concentrate completely on investment across Scotland.
But that's not quite the official policy his advisers rushed to clarify. Labour might permit another vote after 2021.
When would you allow another referendum on independence, Mr Corbyn?
I've answered that question about 10 times today already.
So what exactly is the formal position?
In the early years of a Labour government, I want to concentrate totally on investment all across the UK, including the 70 billion that I want to put in.
That means no to a referendum on independence in that period.
It means saying in the early years, let's say no to that, let's concentrate on what matters.
Independence matters in Scotland, and you need to know where you stand.
Labour will have to work really hard if they want to try and win any new seats in Scotland. In truth, they're hoping to hold on to the few they've already got.
With its proud industrial heritage, central Scotland used to be rock-solid Labour. But the machinery's now in a museum, and in the cafe, voters have moved on too.
My political outlook has always been left of centre, slightly left of centre, and that hasn't changed. And the Labour Party, to me, are drifting off into yesterday's politics.
I would vote for Labour if they were a separate party in Scotland and if they represented what they used to represent.
Probably got a choice between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. Who would you rather see in number 10?
Jeremy Corbyn.
And you look forward to the idea of a Jeremy Corbyn Prime Ministership?
Well, I think I would dread it less than, let's say, the alternative.
SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon says she would work with a minority Labour government to keep the Tories out of power, only if Jeremy Corbyn allows an independence referendum.
I won't help him in power, to get into power, to stay in power, if he doesn't accept the principle that whether there is a referendum in Scotland and what the timescale of that referendum should be determined by the people of Scotland.
My goodness, you're uphill. She knows she can't become Prime Minister, but Ms Sturgeon doesn't want to be left out of the argument. She's taking legal action, demanding to be included in televised leaders' debates. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Coatbridge.
Let's talk to our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, who is on the campaign trail this evening. And the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, gave a speech this evening in Belgium in which he appeared to suggest that Brexit might not actually happen.
That's right, Sophie. Our viewers will be familiar with Donald Tusk as someone who's been the top official in Brussels over these last tricky few years. He is standing down, and he gave something of a farewell speech tonight, in which, as you suggest, he made it pretty clear that he believes Brexit could still be stopped, and he said he wanted to give hope to those people on that side of the argument. Now, it's hard to see that as anything other than backing for one side in this election. And on that other side, though, I understand that the government is to make it clear to Brussels that despite repeated requests from the EU, they are not going to put forward a British name to be the UK Commissioner when there's a big change of all the teams in Brussels who are in charge of all the important decisions. Now, Brussels has been asking the British government to do this for some time now. Boris Johnson promised that he would not, but I understand tonight Sir Tim Barrow, who's our EU ambassador in Brussels, has written to the Commission saying this won't happen because of the guidelines during the election that essentially say the government can't make big sensitive political decisions. But this has been something of a fraught exchange between the EU and the UK, and it may be in the morning there's some raised eyebrows in Brussels over the decision that the government is taking here. So even though the outcome of this election is really unclear, there's still many weeks to go. The wrangling over Brexit is absolutely still live and kicking.
Laura Kuenssberg, thank you.